This is the ninth Naked Dialogue. It's part of our Learn, Play, Lead cultural leadership project. And today we're very pleased to have two speakers with us. From one coming specially all the way to Hong Kong from Penang, Professor Laurence Low, and Paul Zimmerman, that most of you have seen and know. I'm Benny Chair, and I started this place about 34 years ago with the help of a bunch of volunteers, and we do all kinds of things. We mainly is an arts organization. 34 years ago, we started using this building. At that time, it was a disused ice depot, and we converted it into an art space. And now we have regular arts program, and we also have F&B facilities here. You know, if you want to come, to see an exhibition or show, you can also grab a coffee. And we also do cultural exchange, and that's when I first met Laurence in Penang, when we did a program called Spotlight Penang, Spotlight Hong Kong in Penang, and that's when I first visited Laurence Blue Mansion. Blue Mansion is a project that Laurence has very successfully done over the past 26 years. He has seen this old building, the Chiang Fat-Chi building that was in disrepair, and he picked up the project and converted it into an UNESCO award-winning project. It's now one of the most famous boutique hotel in Penang. When you go and visit Penang, do drop by. Laurence is a conservationist, and he's an architect, a practicing architect, and he's also a social activist. And talking about social activism, Paul, of course, is the district councillor for Pok Fulam, and Paul has also been involved with protecting our harbour, and also recently been monitoring the use of country park land. And Paul has become the icon, one of the icons of the umbrella movement, when he opened his umbrella in a very important occasion. And everybody remember that image. Now the Fringe Club is also involved with conservation, because the fact that we've been here for so many years, and when we first moved in, it was just a disused building, and it was not even listed. And now it's a Grade 1 building, and the scaffolding that you see outside is part of our 13th renovation projects. After this is done, we hope that we will have by that time restore our facade, and also mended our roof. The roof has always been in a rather poor condition, because it's a 100-year-old building, and the roof tends to leak. So this time we hope that we're going to mend it, and we're going to open the roof so that we can use it for all kinds of purposes. Now, let me see, how shall we start? Now, the title of this talk is Conserve to Subvert. Now, this title is Laurence's idea. So I'd like Laurence to tell us, why he thinks, by conservation we can also go into social subversion.
Thank you, Benny. First and foremost, I think, let me say that it's an honor and privilege to be welcomed here to the Fringe Club. make it this far in Hong Kong. To get to Hong Kong and then be on the fringe, which actually is a very good thing, because to be a subversive element, you have to exist on the fringe. You cannot be part of the mainstream. And the reason why I suggested this title is because people always ask me, why did you choose conservation? Because prior to that, I had given a lecture called Architecture and the Politics of Architecture. So everybody remembers that lecture. And I say, to be an architect, you cannot avoid being involved in politics. So you work that out for yourself. So when I said, okay, let me find an activity which answers two things. One, it's about protecting the place that I live, where I was born, where I lived, where I actually were given the values that were passed to me. And also, how do I become a politician without being a politician? Because all of life is about politics, if you want to live in the real world. So I thought, in Malaysia at that time, nobody was concerned about preserving the heritage. They didn't understand the word conservation. And we needed access to government. So I thought maybe I'll use conservation as a way to be subversive. Because I remember when I was studying in England at the age of 16, the first book I read when I went to the Architectural Association was they put this book in front of me, and it's called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. And I just loved that title. I must confess I never read the book. But the title itself spurred me on, and I've never forgotten that title. Isn't it beautiful? Teaching as a subversive activity. So when I graduated and went back to Penang, I said, what am I going to do? And I said, okay, if there's anything else that I can't think of, this is one thing that I can do. I can try to make a difference. And so it's about saving the place I love. What makes Penang, Penang? You know, like if you're from Hong Kong, what makes Hong Kong, Hong Kong? And there are places in Hong Kong that you love and you want to protect, like your hike today, right? So I started on that journey, and I found that when you are in conservation and are looking after sort of public legacies, something not just of your own, but something that belongs to the whole community, people don't see you as a threat. They see you as this oddity which comes across and say, save this building, but they don't see you as a political threat. And so I found that as I tried to walk the talk, people actually opened their doors to me. So you get to talk to government, you get to talk to politicians, you get to talk to social activists. You go in and they give you the time of the day. Not only in Penang, but in Malaysia and regionally, right? And then I found that it started to really work. But then I had a very, very much stronger motive, which Penang is predominantly a Chinese community. The main population in Georgetown, where the historic city is actually made out of 90% Chinese, and most of the structures that are not colonial are Chinese structures. And in Malaysia, it's basically an Islamic state, as they want to call it now. And I was taken aback one day when the Prime Minister was with the Chief Minister. The Prime Minister runs the country, the Chief Minister of Penang runs Penang, and they were in this room, and they said, the Prime Minister pointed at the whole of Georgetown from this high tower, and he said, all of that can go. Just keep a few of them. I was so pissed off, I couldn't hold myself, and I just quietly walked out of the room. I said, I swear on my father's grave, he hasn't died then yet, so maybe my grandfather's grave, that I will make sure that I preserve this Chinese heritage. So that was the real subversion. I went about saying, okay, let's get Penang, Georgetown listed as a World Heritage Site. And in collaboration with some people from UNESCO, we actually said, let's get Malacca as a twin city with Penang, and let these two places as World Heritage Site. Why? because the federal government believes that Malacca was founded by the Malays. Actually, it was founded by the Indian civilization, but they say it's founded by the Malays. And so we had to link the Malay history together with the Chinese history, and then the federal government would say, yes, we will agree to list these two places as World Heritage Site. So that is part and parcel of what I mean by subversion. I needed to get the Chinese heritage buildings conserved, but I needed to play politics in order to get that done, right? And I've never declared it. Maybe because it's Hong Kong, I think nobody's listening. Back home, I can say it. While I was doing this and promoting World Heritage listing for Georgetown, which is where the historic city is in Penang, I became the person that developers learned to hate. And all the developers were friends of mine. And they used to have closed-door meetings when they were very nasty about this man called Laurence. And one day, someone comes to me, your good friends, all of them are saying that you are a bloody bastard. You are literally trying to stop their livelihoods. I said, and these are your friends, what are you going to do about it? So my answer always has been, if you want to be a subversive element, you have to pretend that nothing is happening. If you're going to go into an area of confrontation, you have to expect people to spit on you, and you just take it. But in good time, you will, if everything goes right, they will turn around and be convinced. And so ultimately, Georgetown was listed as World Heritage Site. I have saved what I call the Chinese heartland in the whole of Malaysia, and they don't even know it. Because now there's World Heritage Site, it's governed by a management plan. You touch any single building, and any person from the public can literally make a report. And so I've learned that this is actually the best way to fight if you can give people the impression that the idea came from them. I think I'll stop here.
Let me ask the audience this question. Well, how many of you have visited Penang? Put up your hand. Oh, quite a few. And now, how many of you actually know the political situation in Penang? It's the only you call it city, which is governed by the opposition party. That's the only one in Malaysia. And it's the state.
Governed by Chinese parties.
Chinese Malay party. Yes. Now, since Laurence, let me put this question to you very, very quickly, because I can see that there's certain conflict of interest. You being a practicing architect, and your bread and butter is from building, but at the same time, what you're doing is to stop new building to be put up at the expense of taking down heritage buildings. There is a conflict of interest there, isn't there?
Not if it's part of a larger plan, right? So if the plan is prepared by the government, by government planners, and they have all the different sectors that they're looking after, heritage, culture, housing, residential, commercial, etc. It's all part of a much bigger master plan. So as long as all of this is within that master plan, I don't think there's any conflict. Because they would have studied the situation, they would have, to all extents, displayed the plans to the public, they would have given everybody a right to protest if they wanted to. So in that sense, if you put everything into a plan, and you make sure that it's an inclusive plan, then there's no conflict.
We have two natural assets in Hong Kong that we all value. First one is the harbour. Second is our country park. Or you have been involved in conserving these two assets. Can you give us an update on the situation?
Update.
Okay. Well, for the harbour, we got the law enacted in 1997 to protect the harbour. So the Protect the Harbour Ordinance came into place, and the focus from designing Hong Kong point of view has been. If Hong Kong had grown for 150 years through reclamation, and you suddenly stop reclamation, but you continue to grow, then one day there's no harbourfront left. There's going to be buildings right on the waterfront. So that in 2003, that was the thinking to get a focus on the planning of the waterfront. So the waterfront is so protecting the harbour. It has became an issue of protecting the waterfront rather than the harbour. And so far, I think we've been doing pretty good in making sure that we minimize the amount of development that goes on the last remaining land. I say pretty good, not totally good, because we're just in Cha Kuo Ling, we're losing a piece of land to the VTC. So in Kennedy Town, we now have an issue of what is going to happen with that waterfront. And some people want to have lots of activities on it and use it for events, and then it's no longer free space available for people. So, so the discussion is on, but we've been able to, I think, safeguard a lot of land around the harbour. It's not a fantastic execution around it. I don't think government has set aside enough money for doing it up. And I don't think there's enough attention yet to the use of the water, so that the waterfront has a better corresponds with the water. So that's on the country parks. Things look more dire. There are two aspects to fighting for the country parks. One is the enclaves, areas of private land inside the country parks that are where villages have the right to build, where we try to reduce the amount of development they put in. We've been able to reduce it quite a bit, and but not entirely. The biggest win was a recent court case 2-3 weeks ago. The judgment came out, whereby the town planning board has been put under pressure to inquire into the figures that are being put forward by the village representatives. So this is going to put more, so they really have to ascertain whether what the Hungry Cook and the village representatives say is true when they set aside land for them. So that's but the biggest threat right now, so that's kind of there where we are on that one, but on the there's now the plan of taking away county park land for housing, and that is a very poor situation. The government has identified 2 pieces of land, 70 hectares at Dai Lam, 50 hectares in Ma Shan, close to Sha Tin, and they just have identified them. They haven't said how. And now they do a study. They've asked the Housing Society to do a study to look at them, to see whether there's a high landscape value or not, or whether there's a high ecological value or not. But we know that those 2 pieces of land have low landscape value and have low ecological value. So it's a predetermined outcome. They have picked those land. And that is going to then open up an opportunity to go to the community and say, oh, look at the photographs. There's a highway, buildings, ugly villages. Why do we need to keep this country park? And if they win this process, then the sanctity of the boundaries is going to be in play, because they set a very bad precedent. But they can continuously put out this piece of land and say, well, it's not that high. Why don't you develop it? So we have to make sure that they don't win this process. This will become something that's going to be quite tricky. So we just put out a brief to all the lawyers in town and asked them for people that have pro bono legal time to look at this and give us help. So we just issued the brief, and we're hoping that we're going to get some good legal support on how to fight this battle. But in a city where housing is so expensive, those arguments, if they come out with those photographs of country parks that look quite poor, and if they do a soundtrack of the sound at Dai Lam, you can hear the road. It's so you know, they can basically easily convince people, oh, that's not such a high value, we'll use that. But, and that might well be the case, but actually it breaks a procedure of careful development of the country park that we used to have in the past. Just an example to finish up. When they built the road to Yuen Long, Route 3, and it was supposed to go over Dai Lam Country Park, it would consume about 200 hectares of country park. In the end, they went for a tunnel, more expensive, only 2 hectares of land. So it was an essential need, they minimized, and then when they took the 2 hectares, they compensated by giving another 40 hectares back on another side and included it in the country park. So that was a very careful process, very different from what they are orchestrating now. What they're orchestrating now is basically to turn the country parks into a land bank rather than retain it as a special asset. So it's very dangerous.
Well, Laurence, you also have this thing that you have to contend with. That is, the encroachment of the developers on Penang's greenland. What kind of strategies, have you taken up, in defense of your environment?
Well, I'm fortunate to have a group of friends who believe in the same thing. There was some mention in the write-up. There's a very loose coalition which we call the Penang Forum. It was set up after the opposition came into power in 2008. And it's a coalition about 22 NGOs, right? And over time, we have developed a very good working relationship. And so when we are now faced, most of the heritage is now not under threat anymore, most of it. But now the environment is the big thing that's under threat in Penang, where, they're allowing people to build higher on the hills. There's a guideline which says nobody can develop over 250 feet and on slopes that are more than 28 degrees. That's in the structure plan. And yet, they have got a clause which says, except for special projects. So the government in the past has been giving rights to their cronies, so to speak, to put housing on these slopes. And so it's caused a lot of environmental problems. And so what we do in this group now is we come up with very scientific data. We have found that the only way to really get the government to listen to you, or at least to pull back, is to be very, very accurate about what you say. So for example, in terms of the hills, we have set up something called the Penang Hills Watch. We have a website on which anybody who comes across illegal clearing, or even legal clearing but not done properly, can actually just take a photograph, send it to us with the coordinates, and then we will do all the checking and then we put it onto this website. So in the past year, we've actually been able to have 3 meetings with the government. In each and every one of the cases, we compile the cases, we check ourselves to see whether it's legal or illegal, and then we present it to them, and they have to, meet us because it's for public good. And then we ask them to check whether, come back to us in 3 months' time to tell us what action they've taken. So we found that this one is escalating all the time, and more people are actually posting the photographs for us, and now it's spread from just the island into the mainland, and they're asking whether we could actually teach them how to do it in Selangor and in other states. And we found that get indisputable facts, and really they will sit up and listen to you. And I think that's the way that we are going now. And the beautiful part is that technology is there. We send up a drone, we take a picture of the site. The drone can actually now take pictures of the slope, so you can actually see the condition. And we can actually show how it's deteriorated within a year. So it's very factual. And all that goes out to the press. And so either the digital press or the mainstream press, all of them get these copies. And it's a field day for the opposition politicians, right? They just take this out and they say, look, Penang Forum said this is what it is. And so we are starting to be accused of trying to undermine the government. But the fact that we say no, it's perfectly scientific. We're not supporting anyone. We're not trying to overthrow the government. We just want a nice environment for ourselves.
You make it sound so simple. We all know that dealing with the government can sometimes feel like hitting your head against a wall. Paul can tell us about that.
Last night we had a pre-meeting last night. The only thing that I'm trying to figure out is why Laurence can get away with getting so much more impact with his activities, with his with civic society. And I think in Hong Kong and Penang the difference is that in Penang you've got a more diverse political situation, a more dynamic political situation within which the civic society has a greater impact. Where here is we've got a kind of like it's a binary situation. You're either with or without or against, and so whatever you come with, if it doesn't fall within what government is already doing or has already planned to do, then and you're not with that, then you're against them, and so you're with the wrong side. You're with the yellow umbrellas, and if you're with them and support them, you're in blue umbrellas. I mean, it's kind of like it's very binary right now in Hong Kong. That's I think. That limits the impacts that civic society is making. But we have wins. I mean, there are small wins. I mean, Cathy Law was here. I mean, with Heritage Watch, we won the West Wing, Central Police Station. We've been able to reduce the impact of the new build that was going to be there. PMQ, the police merit quarters, was kind of safeguarded. Whether the outcome is entirely I'll leave it up to everybody to decide whether they think it was executed well. But so I mean, there are ways of getting under the skin and getting some things done. But overall, I think the dynamic situation in politics in Penang allows, I think, civil society to have quite a strong voice and impact decisions that they do make somewhat more than we have been able to see in Hong Kong.
Sometimes don't you think we like people in this room a bit like preaching to the converted. I mean, I think
I can't see
most of the
dark.
Most of the people here are sympathetic, to these conservationist approach and causes and so forth. How do we reach out to people that feel that person like yourself, Paul, is a bit of a nuisance, because you're in a way of progress. Not everybody wants to conserve. They want development.
Well, there is, if you take the actual in nature conservation, I mean, the people that we meet on our hikes and our walks is a very diverse group. I mean, and that's not aligned by political views or, but they may not be people that necessarily always come out in situations like this, but it is trying to reach out to broader groups and trying to get more people involved in those discussions. But it's a bit hard today in a society where we have very little mobility between the hinterland and the city. Very like, people that live in London, if the cost of living would be too high, you may live outside London. You live in New York, and then you may live in New Jersey, and so it's kind of easy to do. In Hong Kong, we're kind of confined by our boundaries so strict that the impact of cost of living, it's almost like a life and death situation. You deal with it every day. You can't escape it. So in that scenario, the current situation of the very high housing cost, you can explain it's because the interest rates. It's because the mainland is coming in, it's spending all that money, and so. But that's the reality is they've got to be paid every day, and people feel it. And the waiting list at the housing society. So then the discussion becomes quite critical, and I think we're at that point now that the argument is for more development, more land, more reclamation, because of all of those sentiments. And people believe that it will actually make it easier to live in Hong Kong. And it's hard to argue that that is not the case. So in that scenario, then it comes to how can we get people to have a more, how would I say, a better understanding of all the different choices that we have to make. Let me put it that way. I mean, it's not as black and white, but there is a lot of education that needs to be done, a lot of discussion that we need to have a lot more of these meetings, come to an understanding of the choices.
Talking about education, Laurence, you're adjunct professor at Hong Kong University. Sometimes, we read in the news about preserving some old blocks somewhere, and from the photographs, you look at it and you think, what is the fuss? Why do we not tear it down, and have a new build? If you talk to the resident there, they will tell you, the plumbing is not working and it's infested with all kinds of insects. We want a new build. So the conservationists think one way, then the resident might feel another way. Are there any guidelines, Laurence? You think the good practices of how do we judge when we come face to face with a news item like that?
Well, before I answer that, I've been a Hong Kong watcher for many years, 20 over 30 years, and actually you're doing very well with your advocacy. You're actually doing very well. I mean, more than you think so, because the battles that you won, say like the harbour, is impressive. Okay? And it started with maybe a demolition of pier and things like that, but it escalates. And I think you should take courage on that. You have been able to escalate the awareness very quickly, right? Whereas for us, we took one conservationist from Leon told me, Laurence, don't worry, conservation awareness takes a lifetime to build. And I was very discouraged when he said that to me, but I've seen changes in Hong Kong. Going to your question is really why conserve? Then you have to work out yourself the answers to that, right? I mean, I can give you my personal version of why conserve, right? So you can say it's about collective memory, it's about your roots, it's about having something that reminds you of where you come from, all of that. But each place has to work out its own answers to that question. And when you have sorted it out, very often it is the correct answer. Because there will be a buy-in. And people really, in Malaysia, there's one word for heritage in Malay, which is basically called warisan. So when we started about 30 years ago, nobody understood that word. So everything we said, they say why. Why? If you said don't knock that building down, they say why. You want to protect this site, the question is why. Right? And we had to answer these questions. But then it got past a point where everybody uses that word. And today, when you use the word warisan or heritage, you don't have to explain why. They know why. It's only about whose do you want to keep. Then it becomes a political, contentious issue. But just to answer your question, you have to define that why concern. And for each place, there's a different reason, there's a different explanation, and there will be a different answer. I'm not trying to get out of that.
Actually, I have to laugh when you started that question because I'm on Katie's Facebook right now. Some people are unhappy with me because I suggested that the central market can be taken down and it should be turned into a park. So in the Central Western District Concern Group, Katie Law, me saying so. It's so far the discussion in Hong Kong, we have very few buildings left, and as part of our cityscape, I mean, they're often much more sporadic than probably in Penang. But Penang, it's really part of the overall Penang. Your whole experience of Penang is very much defined by the heritage that you can feel and see. So I guess we're on a different mode there. We're talking about very individual moments in the city, and I think that the central market we had hoped was going to be one of those moments where the market was going to be restored in great fine detail and operated as a market with all those funny little stalls and so on. But we've given it to the URA, who first wanted to put a UFO on top of it, and now they're not going to put a UFO on top of it, but now they're going to demolish the entire inside of the market. All the stalls are going to be gone, except the 2 staircases and 13 stalls, and part of the walls are going to be gone. So if they're going to destroy it to that, the moment is gone. I think that whole sense of walking through the market and the little stalls will be completely gone. And then the question is, well, why leave this kind of weird building there that, with these narrow footpaths around it, if it doesn't give you that experience? Then it just becomes a mall that is very leaves narrow footpaths, and so it doesn't give you anything new that it's already given by all the buildings around it. Well, then we'd be better off at a park with the elevated footbridge overhead and escalators up into the park and take you to mid-levels of the Star Ferry piers, and it becomes a station in the park and a coffee shop where you can sit outside. We don't have enough space between the Vaux Road and Queen's Road to sit and to walk. So that gives us a much better moment, a much better meeting place. Anyway, I put that proposition out there. But of course, then I just want to provoke people like Hetty to make sure they fight harder to get the URA to do a really good job on restoring that building, or otherwise, let's make it a park. But yeah, but for me, the buildings are more moments. The church that has just disappeared on Kennedy Road, the little church. I mean, was it architecturally worth it to keep it? Yes, no. I mean, but that building is, a collective memory. Is a moment in the street, and to me, it's also the very low streetscape where you get all the high rises, and there's suddenly a moment of a relaxation out there. That to me is the value, even more so than the actual architectural value of that building. And when you speak to the churchgoers, they actually all supported to keep the building, or the majority, except for the ones leading in the church, and there was some ownership issue with the property there that allowed this to move ahead. But I think, for us, for me, it's becoming more of those moments in the city that are important to keep. And then if at some stage we can, for some areas, actually get a district, kind of the down zoning for, say, the older part of Central, that it all stays low rises as they are today, and that we keep a whole area of those around Staunton, Elgin, kind of Hollywood Road, that area, if we can keep what is there still, and it becomes a district. By limiting the development of these buildings, they're going to have a very different function in the city going forward. They're going to be a much more intimate experience the way they've always been, and you're going to retain that. But those are the terminology that I would use.
One thing I've noticed is, because it seems that the churches have been abusing, taking advantage of property prices, and it's not a single case. They seem to be able to get away with a lot of things. Being the neighbor of the Anglican Church, we also worry that they're going to put a high rise, right in front of us. There are other cases. Why is the situation? I know in Malaysia and in Singapore, I know better, because they want to keep social harmony. So they leave any religious conflict pretty much outside discussion. So they let churches get away with a lot of things. In Hong Kong as well. Now, is there any way that we can contend with that?
Content with the church. Many people content with the church. It gives them peace, but but it's the opportunity is there, so it's taken. It's a business, and the church will justify this because it will help them to grow their church. It will help them to help people. I mean, everybody always has a good excuse for more money or more development rights. There is always a good excuse for them. There is very few people who will say, no, I'm okay, I'm content with what I see here. It doesn't happen. I mean, it's just unfortunate. So you have to, as a society, come to good reasons why, hey, we've given you this space. You have a privilege to be in the city the way you are. You don't have a right to build a tower on top of it. You have an obligation to the city to stay the way you are, to stay a moment of peace, of a moment of a low rise, an airflow, light, sunlight, you have an obligation to the city. But we tend not to say that. And I think it has to do with the fact that the government gets 30–40% of their revenues from land premiums. They bought into it. The government does not stand up for society because they're complicit in getting the money. So they're not part of this discussion as a neutral observer or a participant or somewhere where consensus is formed in society and then government execute it. No, government wants that money too.
What about the situation in Penang?
Well, in some ways it's no different. I mean, the Catholic Church has sold off most of their property. They've kept a few of the churches, but all the land that was bequeathed to them by the East India Company, they've sold. And whether it's to pay out the debt with the Vatican, which at one time they did, or whether it's a corrupt bishop who just gets a good kickback, this also happens in Penang. But they don't touch the churches as yet. They'll touch the colleges, they'll touch the novitiates, things that they'll say that we don't train any brothers anymore in this place. We don't train any priests at all in Penang. So we just, find a new function for that land. And I think it's a situation which starts with the church itself, and then the congregation actually has no say. We find that in Penang with the Catholic Church, they have no say, and they come out and protest, but they always evoke God's name and say no. We just have to meet the needs of new society. So it's same all over the world. We're not particularly exempt from that.
Some years ago, we had this Saturday morning gathering. I still remember it doesn't seem that long ago when we had our city speak, and I still remember very very clearly we were talking about the harbor front and how inaccessible certain area of the harbor front is. It seems that in the past 10 years we have made some progress there. And living on the island, I noticed that now certain part of the harbor front is accessible to people who want to go there after dinner or take a walk or jog. When it comes to something that benefits the city, it seems that we're getting the government responding to it quite positively. Is that the situation, or actually there's a lot of negotiation behind, under the table or behind our back to achieve that?
I think the harbourfront's a good one. We've got 73 kilometres of harbourfront in Victoria Harbour, and about 50 will be connected. And it's going to be 2025, 2027 that we see really, we're going to be there around. You can walk from Shao Kei Wan all the way to Kennedy Town, or you can walk from Leyu Mun all the way to pretty much Ocean Terminal, and it is going to happen. And I think that people had bought into that idea. Actually, as we campaigned, it turned out that we found out that it wasn't all planned. The government in the 70s had already discussed. So it wasn't a new idea, but it tended to be forgotten all the time. But after the campaign started in 2002, and we got the commission set up in 2004, that commission is giving it longevity. So now we can continuously remind government of that plan. And sometimes it goes wrong. So government was supposed to look after the Quarry Bay waterfront. There's one private site. And the developer has now started construction of a warehouse right on the waterfront, and there's no promenade, and so he blocks the whole thing. But and then he does that because the government hasn't negotiated with him. So now he's starting to do the foundation work and say, do you want to negotiate or not? So we're not that organized entirely in all the locations, but we're getting there. Because I think everywhere people want it. Everybody really, and it's actively used. The moment the waterfront opens up, even if then there's nothing, like Kennedy Town, there's a piece of concrete, no railings, nothing. And everybody goes there every night with their dogs, the bicycles, the drones, the scooters, people take food, and so and it's the community that uses it. So the moment you open that up, because it's breezy, the temperature is lower, you have a nice view, you meet your friends, it's free space, and so the harbour fronts are working in every district where they opened up. So I think we're on a good move there.
How organized are we? The civil action. Laurence talked about the Penang Forum. It seems that you work in a way that you just let whoever wants to lead take the lead. Take the lead. But here in Hong Kong, maybe because of the size, we're 3 times bigger than Penang, and in certain ways we're more complex than Penang. How do you get? But when it comes to civil action, we all know that it can be a very complex issue. How do you deal with that? Because I'm very interested to know how you organize yourself.
I think that's the most difficult question to answer. I've been thinking about it ever since you asked me to speak here. But I think it's who's in that group. First of all, we have a vice chancellor of university who's revered by everybody in the field of education and even in the government. So whenever we have a forum, he's the front man. He says, I can hear, I can see, I can even read, but I will come to your forum and I will do the introduction. Then we have another gentleman who's called the Global NGO. He has organized work for UNDP, he has organized the Third World Network, World Breastfeeding Association. All of that were created by him today. So whenever he stands up, he represents the whole NGO movement. And he can call upon anybody, anywhere in the world, of which he has contacts with, to come and support. Then we have a doctor, we have engineers, we have architects, we have social activists, which is also a publisher. We have a very good reporter who writes daily on every issue that we bring up. And that's wonderful because we feed him information and then he immediately comes up with a story and then he continues over 3-4 days. We have scientific people from the university, you name it. There's some sort of character there who has some position in society. So although we come out in opposition, they're also very scared to, dismiss us because we represent each sector. The National Consumers Association is there, the Malaysian Nature Society is there, the Sabah National, which is about the environment, National Environment guy is there. Somebody from Greenpeace in Malaysia is also on the committee. And we get more and more people all the time, younger and younger people. Now we have filmmakers who start to join us. So I think when they look at all the people that come out at the forum, they start to think that yes, it actually represents every sector of society. And we have young people who work for multinationals, but they are also very good and very efficient in new digital hardware and software. So I think first of all, you need really that breadth of players who can, in themselves, play a role, even independently of the group.
Yeah, I think that's very different in Hong Kong. I mean, if we look at civic society that is at that level, we talk about Tung Wah or Poland Cook or and when we connect with them, then they will be very careful not to be seen to be disagreeing with government. Whereas in Penang, disagreeing with government is fine, because government is a more diverse situation than in Hong Kong. So, but maybe civic society can work harder and trying harder to get more people in. But there's a lot of people that will say, we totally agree with you, keep going. I'm not with you. I don't, you know, I'm out, you know, just talk to me later. I'm not going to talk to you there. So you have that, and that sentiment is quite strong in Hong Kong, where there is people that, the kind of, the situation you mentioned, you know, the Vice Chancellor of the university, I'm sure that he would agree with you, but he's going to be there on the street and fight with Kennedy Town. What? No, I'll stay away from that. The government disagrees. Well, let's just see. Maybe I can do something. I could say something in another room with them. So there's a bit more smoke and mirrors in this city. And then, so I'm not sure. I love the idea, and I think we have to try harder to move towards that Penang Forum concept, and maybe. But it's not going to be easy in this town, because the moment you disagree with government on an issue, a lot of people will disappear, and they will not want to be part of that disagreement.
Or if we pick, 20 respectable persons in Hong Kong, it's not an easy task, because everyone has something that you can discredit he or she with. So if you pick 20 men, who would you pick, to represent?
The whole city is full of good people. I have no problems with that at all. But the professional institutes, I had this discussion at some stage with somebody like Rocco Yim for the architects, and he says like, oh, these problems, we've had them for decades. And I'm like, yeah, but you guys only talk behind closed doors and you don't take it public. And then he started to take it more public, and then somebody had a word. Somebody made a comment, and then it doesn't go as public anymore, the debate. So, I mean, that's a problem in the city. So the moment there is this kind of disagreement, it cannot be public so quickly, and then everybody steps back, disappears a bit. And now with this, this binary situation, with the black and white that we're having is in Hong Kong, it's getting a little bit more extreme. That there are a lot of people stepping back and going, talk to me later. And that's not helpful, because then the media doesn't learn, people don't learn about the debate. Life is not black and white, life is grey, and all different tones of grey. And people have to learn the different tones of grey, and if they don't learn them, and they only think it's black and white, then you don't make a lot of progress. So our learning in Hong Kong is really stunning in that way, unlike what you have been able to achieve in Penang, I think.
No, I disagree with that.
Disagree,
yeah,
okay.
because I think
They like that.
we are just as discouraged as you are sometimes, even more so, And it's just that Benny was saying to me at lunch, we're just optimists. We keep going and believing that we can achieve it even though we don't, right? And at the end of the day, if I count all the battles that we won, maybe they're not so important after all. But I think it's in the doing of it. It's wanting to believe in something and believing that you put your heart and soul in it, something can happen, right? If it doesn't happen, okay, you move on and do the next one. But that is the spirit that should exist. And then you just have to find a way to co-opt these people in, if it's even in a clandestine fashion. Even if it's just to give you a piece of information so that you can block the road at the right time, you do it. So I'm sure you'll find a way to do it in Hong Kong. And I think Hong Kong people are much smarter than Malaysians. Very much smarter, because
I'm not going to comment on that.
I mean, that's my observation, because the comments we get from the public sometimes is really dumb. I mean, like, no, the other day, right, we had a flood, the largest flood Penang had ever experienced, right? It flooded the whole heritage city, and it looked like the color of coffee. So it means that it was from the hills, from cut slopes. And everybody denied that, okay? So, but it came from the rivers, which overflowed and then flowed back into the city, which has never happened in my lifetime. Then somebody got buried with a hill slope that fell. It just collapsed and killed 11 people. And we are lucky there was one Penang night there. The rest were Bangladesh workers. Now, if they were all foreigners, nobody would have cared. So I said to the local architectural association, we have this meeting once every 3 months with the local authority. And I said, can you put on the agenda that we really have to set up this committee to look at sustainable development? And she's very good. Every time I ask her to do something, she does it. Because nobody else gives her ideas, right? And then the day before the meeting, she phones up and at 7 o'clock in the evening and said, Laurence, what is sustainable development? what do you mean by that? I mean, come on, you're a senior architect in town, and you ask me, and I said, because the developers phoned me up and said, and asked me, are you all trying to stop us from building on the hill slope? I mean, I could give her lesson 101 in sustainable development. That is the caliber of our leaders. Okay, so I think it's a bit smarter.
Okay.
In a way, I think in Penang you have two parents that if one doesn't listen to you, then you can go to another. So the city government and the federal government. In Hong Kong, it's not. We don't feel like that. Maybe we also have two parents, but one parent would never listen to you unless the other parent tells him or her so. Now that makes the situation quite different. The dynamics are different.
Well, what you don't have is wholesale corruption. Now, if you look at the special one in Malaysia, and he has siphoned out billions, right? And that is happening in every state at every level, including Penang. So whatever you try to do, corruption is the biggest factor that you'll fight with. And you're talking about $1 billion against $1. You're never going to win, no matter how good your reasoning is, no matter how logical it is. But you don't have that. I don't think you're losing billions, right? Corruption, we are.
But you're right, and so the advantage is we have a very efficient government in many ways. But when we went to Vancouver and Sydney to look at harbourfront development, one of the things that became apparent, for example, in Sydney, you have 3 levels of government. And one level of government may own the port, and the other one owns the railway, and the other one's control over the city. So they're all fighting with each other about responsibility for the waterfront, like the Rocks and Darling Harbour. But because they fight, they have to, it goes public. And the fights become public over money and responsibility. And therefore they have to start defining solutions. And that goes via the media, and the people learn. So that correspondence, that communication is actually extremely helpful. Where in Hong Kong we don't have to. Government makes a decision, and we'll have consulted you, and then still go ahead, and that's it. So the discussion doesn't go very far, doesn't go very deep. So you have a very efficient government, lots of very powerful, and that's actually hampering making good decisions. You want people to dispute. You want people to fight and discuss and disagree. And that will help to get better ideas out. And if you don't have that discussion, you don't get good ideas to come to the front. You want people to disagree and struggle with the ideas, and the best idea wins. And so that advantage in Vancouver and Sydney is visible. And here you can see that we're making very dumb decisions, and that become white elephants. They just haven't been discussed very well. We wouldn't have had a Macau to High Bridge without a rail if it had been a fight. We wouldn't have had the express rail in West Kowloon. We would have had it in Kam Sheung if it had been a fight. But because it is not a fight, it just gets pushed through. You get a dumb solution, something like, yeah, it works, the engineers can do it, but is it a smart solution? The cruise terminal, the end of the Kai Tak runway? No, it's not smart. So we're ending up with those kind of dumb decisions because we don't have enough dialogue and fights about it. And things can be pushed through. So I like dialogues. I like fights between various levels of government. Very helpful.
But sometimes, don't you find that you have seeds of doubts in your mind? by believing that those experts probably have thought through the whole thing and come up with the best solution. But sometimes you just feel that it can't be like this. This is actually very dumb. Why can't you find other, smarter way to do it? But is it really the situation? Is it really the case that these professionals are sometimes like opening two doors for a cat and a dog?
No, I think it's a lot of government departments think in silos, right? And it's this whole silo mentality that we confront each and every time. And really, it's trying to create a platform where all the ideas come together without being contentious per se, but each one could be advocating a slightly different position. And if there's a way to create this platform for discussion, better solutions have to come. And I think today's technology allows us to do that, and we are trying to find ways to do it. And I work in an organization where, in fact, we have created a platform because nobody can talk to each other. So the platform we create is that we intervene, we come up with urban solutions, we speak to the government, we interpret what they want, we put it on the table, we speak to the business community, we speak to the stakeholders, we speak to civil society, and we refer to global solutions. And we pick things out, and then we put it on the table, and most times they say, well, we can't think of something better, why don't you just go and do it? So we go out and do it. And so we're actually doing a lot of urban regeneration, rejuvenation projects that way. We have now taken over the whole redesign of the waterfront by default, because we can deliver the intellectual content which the local authority cannot do. We're starting to look at different projects throughout the country in that way. And I think that's another way of intervening, not being subversive, but intervening without being threatening. And really, as I said, let them think that it's their idea, but we do the work. And it works every time. I mean, like, we've learned how to deal with a very arrogant, is there anybody here from Penang who might report me? No, I told them yesterday that every Penang forum meeting, that special branch of the police are there. And they just sit there, they ignore us, and they go away, and nothing happens. Nothing has happened for 8 years, so you must be saying something right. But a dictator, really, if ever there was a dictator, this man is a dictator. But we've learned that when you want to present an idea, you'll go to see him privately and say, this is the presentation we're doing tomorrow at the state meeting. What do you think? And most times he's too busy and will say yes. But then when we go and do the presentation, he doesn't veto it. But if you present it and he doesn't like the idea, then hell breaks loose. So with this particular company that does public work, we do that all the time now. And it's smooth sailing all the way. I don't know, it's just some people don't like to be challenged.
I'd like to bring up the third runway at the airport. That's a different kind of situation. Now, because I live right under the fly path, so I'm naturally very concerned. And I've been following this for a while, and what the airport authority has done this sleight of hand thing, that instead of going to LegCo for money, then they turn around and say, well, we don't need your money. We're going to raise the money and build a third runway anyway. But talking to people who have knowledge about managing airports, they're saying, well, there's actually no need to build a third runway at this stage. By using the existing facilities more efficiently, we can save a lot of money and also the environment. But what the airport authority has done is something that it seems that nobody can put a check on it, because they now do not, basically do not have to listen to anybody, because they say they don't need your money. They'll just get the money from the users in future. Now, in a situation like this, what can we do? Let's say from going and protest incessantly at the airport.
Well, not much on the airport. I mean, I think everybody has tried pretty hard to try to get facts and figures and global experiences on the table, especially the Heathrow experience. But it's difficult in the scenario of a wealthy government and a wealthy institution, the airport, to change that plan. I mean, that's just under the current laws and situation we have in Hong Kong.
What kind of pressure can you put on?
Beyond what hasn't been done in the past, I think every means had been tried. But also in terms of the community impact is not that high. So that is immediately experienced, except for Mile 1 residents. And so people are not going to think about it, and they don't get the community with you. But I think that the impact on the Hong Kong community, once the runway is operating, I think people are going to come up with a lot of complaints about noise. People don't know yet how many airplanes are going to get over their heads once the thing is open. In the whole of Sha Tin and Sai Kung area, there's a lot of more noise coming that people are just not aware of. And once that happens, then people say, yeah, it used to be so quiet here. But it's hard to convince them today. So it's current situation is difficult. The Heathrow, because you have to negotiate the land with so many different owners and so many different councils and so many different people, therefore you have to be very much educated, and everybody's very educated about the plans, but also people have to be very, everybody's involved in it has to be really fighting really hard before the decision is made. And out of that discussion comes better planning. But if you have all the abilities, you've got all the cash, you don't have the legal constraint, you don't have the land constraint, you don't have the political constraint, you can make very big decisions without a lot of discussion. And whether they're going to have an impact, the negative impacts then become apparent later. Because that would mean spin down. Sorry. Where do you live?
Fly Park. Okay, now instead of drawing conclusions over what we've spoken, I'm going to open to the floor for some Q&A. We still have a bit of time left, not much. So, any questions?
Well, just talked about community impact. I just want to know in Penang, the situation while you were fighting for the conservation. At the time, I know you mentioned the majority of the residents in Penang are Chinese community. How far were they participative, or was that the mainstream opinion of the Chinese community to conserve all these buildings?
The truth be told, there were just 5 or 6 of us fighting the battle. You have to create the impression that you're one of a million. And then everything starts to work and fall into place. So, but really it's about, in this particular case, it was about international politics. So the first thing we arranged was, just to explain it in slightly greater depth. We got Richard Engelhardt from Bangkok, UNESCO, and we had a chat with him and said, okay, get the state government to invite me. So we primed the state government. I drafted a letter, he signed it, and we invited Richard. Then Richard said, what would you like me to do for you? So they said, okay, we want you to discuss the economics of heritage. Okay. In 1 year, he organized a huge conference that lasted 10 days that tired all of us out. And from that, he created a whole network of people, in 7 different cities aspiring for this same thing. How do you make money from heritage, etc., etc. So it started to grow. Then whilst he was there, he said, by the way, you know, you have one of the most intact historical cities in Asia. So, hello, really? Why don't you try for World Heritage listing? And you can make lots of money from it. And that was really the whole thing about that conference, but knowing that you're preaching the wrong message. But any message to get it done is worth, you know, pulling the wool over their eyes. And so it escalated. So after 10 years, we actually got the listing. But we worked through, and so in fact, when we had to do it, there's a group of about 10 of us, that's all. We didn't tell anybody that it's for the Chinese or the Malays or the Indians or anything. We just said, why Georgetown is this wonderful place, and if we get World Heritage listing, you know,
And make a lot of money.
make a lot of money. We will actually renew the city because it's falling apart. My argument was that we needed a new industry, financial industry in Penang, because electronics was a sunset industry. And so the argument came in. And then at the same time, the Sovereign Fund of Malaysia, Khazanah National, they were entrusted with really growing the northern part of Malaysia. And we sat down and we spoke about this exactly. And so they also came in and did this something about transformation, and at the heart of transformation is a cultural, historic town. So all of it fell in place. But there were only a few of us in that conversation. In the end, now everybody lays claim to having done it, which is wonderful, right? And it actually has happened, you know. Young people want to come back again. Everybody takes pride. Every buildings are being refreshed and renewed every other day, you know. In fact, we are too successful. Right?
I just think the conservation movement, the heritage conservation movement, is of course a kind of, as you say, you know, a small group of people, elitist kind of thing. But on the other hand, I think it's really important to get the ordinary people to be involved, and that's what we think is equally important or even more important. Now, because in Hong Kong, I really want to echo Paul's statement that sometimes many of the professionals are being hired by the government, or they have some, you know, conflict of interest that they won't be ready to come out and say no and say, you know, stopping the government from, you know, demolishing the heritage. But on the other hand, there are so many of us, the ordinary citizens, that we think we have to empower ourselves to do to become the advocate for heritage. And that, I think, is more important, because we have several battles these days which involve the residents of different communities, like in Kennedy Town, that we are trying to safeguard the harbourfront. In Kowloon East, we are trying to fight for the Charcoal Lane Park, right? So we just can't rely on the professionals, the elite. But we have to get the community of people to get together and fight for themselves. And we have to, through the process, to empower the people. And then I think that would make the conservation movement a more meaningful movement. And that even if we succeed or if we lose, the whole process is a kind of a more democratic and empowering movement for Hong Kong people and the community.
I agree 100%. Okay. Although I say the elitist people have to lead the charge, yes, because we are the ones. I've been trained to forecast what the future is in my profession as architect and planner. We always look ahead, right? And we kind of forecast what the future would be. And so we are the first in line, and we have to accept that responsibility, right or wrong. But the Blue House, okay? I said I'm a Hong Kong watcher. I first encountered that house 15 years ago when AMO brought me to see it. They asked me what to do with it. I told them what I would do with it. Then years later, URA made me an advisor. I came in for 2 years and they brought me to exactly the same site and said, what do you think we should do with it? I said exactly the same thing. And what has happened is exactly what I said. But what you have now is the badge of honor. Right? You have won the UNESCO Award of Excellence. And maybe it's a nice place to tell the story. I've always advocated, I've been a judge for the UNESCO Heritage Awards for the last 17 years. I drew up the competition rules for UNESCO. I won the first award, so that was really an insider job. But as years passed, we said that we are not going to celebrate necessarily the architecture of the prince, the politicians, and the priests. So your churches, your palaces, etc. You have to look at what belongs to the common. And so over the years, we have fought for that idea. And then so when this project was submitted this year, there was a lot of resistance to it. So much so that there was more resistance this year than any other year in the competition to give the Blue House an award of excellence. So on the last day, I literally had to ask for 10 minutes with all the judges to make a presentation. I said, this is why I think it should be given the highest award. So I went through the whole lot. I said, first of all, it's the unloved heritage. It's just a common concrete building, and everybody will advocate tearing it down. And that's why it's important to celebrate the existence. We talk about the intangible cultural heritage, memory, collective memory, the people that are living in the place, and we always say, don't move people out. And so in fact, miraculously, you kept the people there while you renovated the place, which is really an idiotic thing to do, but never mind, you did it. But I'm saying things tongue-in-cheek sometimes, right? And all the right moves were made. Whether the dossier was crafted cleverly or not, maybe I should look at Owen, I don't know. Because he did ask me a few questions. So gave him some tips on how to do it. But they had this roll call of hundreds of people who were involved, right? Architects, engineers, NGOs, etc., etc. And it was an impressive roll call. So all of that I highlighted. And I said, no, if we do not fight for the common heritage, if we do not fight to celebrate what community wants, if we do not fight for the whole effort of cultural mapping, the whole thing about recording oral history, etc., right? And keeping the neighborhood intact, then what are we fighting for? So I did this 10-minute talk, and everybody was against it, had to shut up, and the rest of them said yes. But the argument against it that it will be very disruptive, because there's a hidden agenda. I said, but I've always lived on hidden agendas. That's why I said we subvert. Now, the reason why I'm saying this and why I'm promoting it is because we did the same thing in Singapore. Singapore does not recognize you unless you are the top awardee. Right? So for many years we thought Singapore got an honorable mention. Nobody listened to the practitioners. Then we gave them a award of merit. Nobody gave them the kind of day. I mean, we track it, right? And so I said, we're going to be very political. So one year when all the projects were balanced, we said, we'll give this particular temple an award of excellence. The people who worked on that building were all of a sudden given recognition in Singapore. And today, the people who actually did that restoration sit on the Architectural Heritage Awards Committee. And all of a sudden, they are willing to look at other areas in Singapore. They're looking at normal heritage, which is, as I said, the unlearned heritage. So you actually have a wonderful catalyst here. You all now have to learn how to use that catalyst. So if it's disruptive, and it's been recognized internationally, and that's what we're saying, you will never be a prophet in your own land. But the prophets from overseas have said, yes, this is the best project. So you really have to use it. Milk it for as much as you can, because you're not going to get a second chance. Okay?
Very interesting discussion. I'm still thinking about, some of the things that Katie said about, empowering the people and all that. I think when you have an issue that is very clear and it's not ambivalent, like, some long-term effects on the environment or on conservation and all that. When it comes to that, then it takes somebody, with vision like yourself, Laurence, to sort of muddy the water and then get something going. But for the general public, I think when we comes to dealing with issues that are ambivalent and long term, that's where we encountered difficulties. When people cannot see the issues properly framed. Those are the sometimes important issues at hand, and this is when we need people, prophets of overseas or whatnot, to point the way to us.
Yeah, but also people in Hong Kong to be involved, and people that have baby steps. You cannot expect Madam Wong, who has a child who's sick and the husband is at work, to be concerned about whatever the development of the waterfront and how what's going to look like in 10 years down the line. And it will be unfair to even suggest that she should. I think that's professionals and people that are engaged. It's your obligation to engage and to try to express and to get people to come along and to fight and have dialogues about ideas and make sure people can then, the simplified message they can then take away and they can make a choice. That's your responsibility, and I think that's the responsibility of people that are engaged and willing to sit in a room today, and that's our responsibility. We have to do that. And then the next step is, of course, can you then engage more people so you grow the family, like we did in Kennedy Town just now. I mean, we have now more and new people that are fighting for their waterfront because we woke them up to something that we knew was going to happen. And now they're waking up, and now somebody steps up in that community that starts to take the lead. And then, so hopefully then a group will grow around that, and then, so we then who kind of saw this happening can step away with that. We can give advice on the process, where the points of intervention could be, how you could do, who you could contact. But then you let them grow on their own issue and take responsibility. And where they take it is them, is their choice. And it may well be not exactly where you would want to go, then it's fine too. So yeah,
well, I think sometime down the road, you can look back at Hong Kong, and you're going to ask yourself, what was the tipping point, right? You need a catalyst that changes things. And maybe I'll say that maybe the demolition of Kingsfield was it? Maybe, right? From that point, as an outsider, I started noticing that things started to pick up, escalate. And then when you ask people, why did you protest against the demolition? They don't know. But they were part of the movement. And now the next thing is to say, okay, how do we make things a movement? Not an isolated sort of group things, but make it a collective movement, right? But so, you have to think of what will catalyze that next action, whether you fight for A, B, or C, but which one will be the game changer? You have to be very devious about it. You cannot be innocent about it, right? If you're going to be innocent about it, then I think you maybe some social work or somewhere work, but it is a dangerous game sometimes. It is a very painful game. I sit here, telling you stories, but bloody hell, I had sleepless nights. And there were days when I went out and we were so clever, we marked the tree at 3 o'clock in the morning so nobody will notice us. Somebody was following us and someone on a motorbike came around and took it off the tree. And then I said to my wife, are we crazy? 3 o'clock in the morning, they could have just shot us dead on the side and ran away. But sometimes we are innocent in that way because we believe, but then now I say let's be a bit more careful. That's why when we do a forum where there's police around, but you have to decide, you have to fight the right battles. You have to decide what is the catalyst that's going to do it, right? And you have to work towards that tipping point. Then it changes everything. That's all I can share with you. That's my experience over 40 years.
Right. We have to wrap up now. 2 takeaways. First is a small number of people actually can make big changes. As they say, the American Revolution, actually, the founding fathers was just, you can count them on one hand. So never underestimate small numbers. That's one thing. Second,
Be devious.
be devious.
Don't be afraid to be
Excuse
devious.
me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just comment on the umbrella movement and how that's going to be a catalyst or an impact?
From the outside.
Because the umbrella movement is, we still can't define precisely what it is, but it certainly creates a kind of very weird kind of democratic space in this tyranny of this financial hub, right? So I'm just wondering, because you're saying a small number, that's making changes, but in terms of the umbrella movement, we have this huge group of people that will be participating in that space, and I'm just wondering, do you have any comment on this sort of movement making any kind of impact in terms of the future of Hong Kong?
Or maybe the artists and the performers should answer that. But I've learned that in the public realm, you have to be a showman or a showwoman or whatever it is. You have to find something that captures imagination, right? Whatever it is. So if the umbrella movement was symbolic of that, then it was the right move. It maybe have been unintentional, it was going to rain, whatever it is. In Malaysia, they have something called Bersih. And so it's actually to fight for democracy and into Bersih number 5, right? And we're still losing the battle, but everybody wears yellow. And everybody who's Malaysian in other cities in the world on that day will wear yellow. Now, that has become symbolic, right? So when we go out, we put this yellow shirt on and automatically identifies us as the people who want change. So whatever it is, why yellow, I have no idea. Right? Your yellow umbrella, but it's a nice color. It's very bright, people notice it, it's in your face, right? And it's maybe royalty. But you have to capture people's imagination with what you do, because it's all about showing showmanship. Right? And we try to do that. We try to be dramatic. We try to be sexy. So I have the reputation of going to the steering committee of Penang Forum, and one day they're talking about how do we go do this press statement and everything. I said, hey friends, why don't we make it a bit more sexy sounding? And so I started redraft that tagline. And after that, every time they run out of ideas, they say, please phone Laurence up and ask him to give us a sexy tagline. And that's what it is. It's about advertising, it's about branding. And today you have to brand your movement. Right? And there's so many experts around, right?
Yeah, so take away, number one, small number can effect change. to be strategic. I think the word devious is a little bit,
I like that one.
and
I'm not
then
sure we answered your question though.
and then takeaway number 3 is from whatever observations we make about human activities, every 3 steps forward, expect 2 steps backward. But still, we're making progress. So if we take the long-term view, we will get there one day. But you have to dress sexy. Maybe that will help.
And don't give up hope. And I think the question about the Yellow Umbrella movement is pretty much that. I mean, I think it's been really good that people have come together and expressed themselves and have great aspiration for the city. But there is also now, of course, a group who feels hopeless. And I think the city will have, and that hopelessness, people seeking an answer to that. And that's why you asked that question. And it will take time to find an answer. And everybody's looking for that answer. And I can't give you the answer. I don't think anybody can give you the answer. I think as a city, I think we have to be proud of our city and make our city a better place. And then with that ourselves, so people say like, okay, go run, get fit, get healthy. And then when you're fit and healthy, then a lot of these problems become clearer. I remember my doctor once said, when I wasn't in a good state, he said, well, I can give you drugs, I can get you a psychologist, or you go for a run. I went for a run, and I ran for 2 years, and I felt very fit and solved a lot of my issues. But, and I think that's one that, if we focus on the running in the city, maybe that will all help us to get through a difficult period. I don't know whether that helps. But I love your question, and it's one that everybody's struggling with today. But don't give up hope and go for a run.
So thank you, Laurence. Thank you, Paul. And thank you for coming. Thank you.